There you go.
Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Friday, January 24th, 2025. It's about 11 a.m. and we're continuing with testimony regarding the FY25 budget adjustment. We have with us right now before lunch is the Department of Labor. We appreciate you coming in. We have a lot of new members. So we'll go around and introduce ourselves and then we'll have you introduce yourselves and tell us what you have. So
Good morning, I'm Dave Iacovoni, live in Morrisville, represent the Lamoille, Washington district. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Good morning and welcome. John Kosenska from Burke, and I represent the Essex Caledonia district.
Mike Nigro from Bennington and Pelham. Tom Stevens from Waterbury, representing the Washington Chittenden district.
Good morning, Jim Harrison. I represent Chittenden, Bend, and Killington. And
Robin Shy from Middlebury.
Lindley from Burlington.
Trevor Squirrel, Underhill, and Jericho.
Wayne Rush, Highgate, Franklin, Berkshire, and Richford.
Mike Moriarty from the Wyndham 4 District, in Dummerston.
Great. For the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner for the Department of Labor. And to my right is Chad Wozniak, our CFO. Also in the room with us is Deputy Commissioner Kendall Smith, who many of you probably know, and our Principal Assistant and Legislative Liaison, Rowan Hoff.
just might interject something.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rowan. She actually used to be a committee assistant in this room when it was then House Education. And I remember seeing some kind of trophy on her desk. I wondered if she brought that trophy over to Labor.
I have not seen the trophy. Rowan, did you bring that to the department?
You want to explain?
You want to explain how you got that trophy?
I worst bet. I at being the worst, in fact.
She excelled. You were great.
In the wrong way.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't.
Sorry, I was
For the profession, and she chose the road less taken.
Take a turn.
It's scary.
You will find a way to bring March Madness into
Yes.
almost any competition. Anyway, welcome. And I don't think we have any documents from you. You didn't bring anything?
We do not.
Okay.
Just because I think you had questions about a couple of things in the BAA that may be tangentially attached to the Department of Labor, but the Department of Labor doesn't have any specific asks in the current BAA.
No, you don't, but you have an $8 million reversion, which is
Correct.
one of the things that stood out as the winningest, biggest reversion in the budget adjustment. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So really the big thing about the $8 million is unspent funds that were part of the department's base budget. And there are two reasons they're unspent. One is back in the pandemic, we received a large portion of ARPA dollars for UI administration. And so we were still utilizing those dollars up until this current year. And so, those were somewhat restrictive. They had a sunset period at the end of the calendar year in 24. So, our strategy there was to use as many of those dollars as we could before tapping into general fund dollars. So there are two line items in the department's base budget that one is for UI supplemental administration supplemental. And to help us administer the UI program. And then the other one is for UI modernization. And so those are for the business costs associated with the modernization of our system, which you may or may not be familiar with. And so the second half, so the revision of 8 million is a combination of monies that were unspent in FY23 and FY24. And again, one was because we were using federal ARPA dollars. The second reason is because we hadn't actually started the modernization effort yet. So we did not spend out of the modernization line. That project has started. It started in September of 24. So we will use those funds in our base budget this year, but those are from the last 2 fiscal years. They were carry forwards from the last 2 years.
And you didn't want to carry forward with the project starting to be able to.
I mean, we'd always, who doesn't like additional funds, but, you know, as part of a larger strategy and ability to fund other projects across state government, especially with the priority on housing investments and education reform. You know, we were in alignment with finance and management on putting those to use in other parts. If we have, in other parts of state government, if we have a need, which I don't think we do right now, there may come a time later, whether it's modernization or UI administration, you know, we are happy to bring those back as part of next year, as part of the BAA process or the general fund, but there wasn't a current need in the current BAA for that.
Can you give us a very, very quick update, high level, on where we are in the UI modernization?
Yeah, so we are working with our vendor, which is FAST. FAST is also the vendor that the DMV uses and the tax department. They were also the winning bid. We did do a full bid on this project. Technically, it's a ADS project, even though we're the ones who will benefit from this modernization effort. So you may at some point hear from ADS as it is in their project portfolio. It's roughly an 18-month project, which kicked off again, like I said, August, September of 24. Our slated go live date is around spring, summer, so probably between May and July of 26. So we're a little bit more than a year away from going live, but we have moved through a lot of the UI is broken really essentially into 2 parts. One is the tax side of the house. So employers pay taxes. Those taxes go into the trust fund, and then the benefit side of the house, and we pay benefits to claimants out of the UI trust fund. And so we had to build tax first because that's where the funding into the trust fund goes, but it also is how we calculate claimants' benefit amount. So a benefit amount is based on the amount of wages earned in their base period, and we can go into more details on that, but essentially employers report quarterly wage and contribution reports to the department. And it's those wage reports that create a record for each employee in the state of Vermont. So when they do come through our door, if they come through our door, we can determine if they're eligible. So they have to earn a certain amount of wages in their base period. And then from there, we calculate what benefit amount is going to be based on those wages. So you have to build the tax side first so that it can inform the benefit side. And that's expected, like I said, to go live in the first half of 2026.
So I have a question. Many of us are getting emails from constituents about how long it is taking to get their unemployment, and they're stuck in this black hole of adjudication. If they do something wrong, people are going 180 days without having unemployment. They're going through their savings. What's happening there, and couldn't some of this money be used to make that happen better?
So it's a combination of a couple different things. So a claim, an individual wants to file for benefits, needs to call our call center, and we initiate a new claim for them. Part of the reason they call is because it cuts down on our fraud. And we did at one point during the pandemic have a forward-facing application. What we saw is about 90% of the claims that came into the department during that time were fraud and 10% were real. So we were spending more time trying to suss out the real claims out of the massive amount of fraud. When we take the claims over the phone, about 10% of the claims are fraud and 90% of the claims are real, because fraudsters, believe it or not, don't like to talk to another human being. But what happened is when we had to make all the changes to the mainframe during the pandemic, there were a lot of things that as one described it, it was like taking the genie out of the bottle. The genie will never go back into the bottle because of the changes made to the mainframe. It will never operate the way it originally operated or was designed to operate. So a lot of our processes became manual. And so what did take 7 minutes to open a claim over the phone now takes 20 to 30 minutes to open a claim over the phone. I will say that just for perspective, or a little bit of background, there's roughly, at this point in time of the year, it's our busiest season, but we are actually moving out of the busiest season. So the volume that's coming into our claim center is already starting to reduce. That's because of seasonal layoffs. So it really ramps up in November, and then heading into February and March, it tails off. That has made it extremely hard for us to staff appropriately, because you can't staff up in an instance. One, it takes a long time to onboard people. It takes an even longer time for them to be trained in how to administer unemployment insurance benefits in accordance with the law. And then then what do you do with them when the volume subsides? Do you lay all those individuals off? And that's why going with a vendor didn't work well for us, because if you remember back during the pandemic, we had a vendor and we received just a massive amount of complaints because the people on the other end of the phone couldn't help the claimant who was calling because they weren't knowledgeable. It did afford us the ability to ramp up and ramp down. It cost us a lot of money as a state, but it also didn't provide great customer service to claimants. So when claimants come in, there's roughly about 4,000 people at this time of year collecting claimants. Those are not collecting claim benefits. Those are not the same 4,000 people every week. There are people who roll off and roll on to benefits, but as of about a week or two ago, it was a little over 4,000 people. There's roughly double that in the number of people who are unemployed in the state of Vermont. So the number of unemployed people and the number of people collecting benefits are two separate.
But what about people in adjudication? They're not collecting benefits.
They are part of the
decide.
Well, they are part of the claim population. So they are part of that 4,000 people. And some do collect benefits when they're in adjudications, not all of them. And the current average turnaround time in adjudications right now is roughly about 60 days. So it's not 180 days or 120 days. It's about 60 days. And what can take either a long amount of time or a short amount of time is we have to afford due process to both parties in those instances. So the claimant and the employer are afforded due process. There's anywhere from 800 to 1,000 claims that go through adjudications on a regular basis. Roughly 50% of all claims go into adjudications, which is pretty normal. And adjudications just means additional fact finding. So there's something that was marked on an individual's claim when they filed that says, oh, we need to do more due diligence, need to understand the implications of, if they said they received additional wages, or if they were let go from their place of employment, but they received a severance or payout of annual leave time. Those are things that need to be adjudicated. Or what we've also find is that, maybe they filed during a week where they were also earning wages. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody did anything wrong. It just requires additional fact finding so that we can ensure that we're administering the program in accordance with the law. To your point, it is a long time. I mean, we would love to see that number under 30 days. Our biggest struggle right now has been hiring and retaining staff. These are not high-paid positions. They are high-stress positions. They are dealing with people on their worst day because, at that time when somebody gets let go, their entire world is flipped upside down. So our biggest challenge has been finding staff to work for us and then retaining those staff. We are currently fully staffed in adjudications, and it's been that way for probably the past 4 weeks, but that's the first time we've been fully staffed probably in the last 2 or 3 years. So we are looking to add one position to the adjudications team, again, to help what happens is, we are either going through turnover cycles or it takes somebody months to be trained in how to be an adjudicator. So we might have a new staff person, but they have to, they're going through 3 to 4 months of training. Or we have people who are out on any given day, right? From everything from sickness to family medical leave to vacation time. And so it's also hard to maintain that critical level of staff. So I'm not sure more money would fix the problem, I guess is what I'm saying, is that, the hard part is identifying people, available people who want to work in adjudications and then helping them stay in, continue working for the department.
Rouge?
Yeah, I had a question back on the changes that were made during some IT changes during COVID that made it more difficult. And so this was a software package that a contractor did, or we don't have IT people change this?
Yeah, so the background is the UI mainframe first went live in June of 1970. The code was updated in the 80s. And so we have an internal IT team. By the way, 100% of that team has turned over prior to the pandemic, within the pandemic period. So there is no historical knowledge on that team.
So the coding language back in the 80s is not the same as the coding language. We don't have anybody around anymore.
Correct. So we do have a very talented team, and some of them have been working a long time, but the team working on it now is not the team that worked on it before the pandemic occurred. And if you remember, there were a lot of things we did as a state that ensured we could move as many people through the process as quickly as we could to get benefits out the door. And some of that was, trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, that we asked the system to do things that it wasn't designed to do, and to, negate or, not look at certain code requirements or features of the system in order to move claims more quickly. But when you don't have the knowledge, right, of the people of how you have to, one, know how to use COBOL. You need to be an expert in how UI works. And then you have to know how the system was originally coded, because it's millions of lines of code and they all have downstream impacts, right? So.
And they're using SQL Server now?
No, we're still using the COBOL code, but I don't know about the
New stuff.
what's that?
What's being created?
They have their own proprietary system, the FAST system. So I couldn't tell you what the back end is, but they are live in multiple states with a UI system. And I think the benefit there will be, it's somebody under contract. They've come out, they're now on their 27th version of their core system. So they have a proven core system and they update it regularly. And it is, there are only so many vendors that play in this world of unemployment insurance. They are the premier vendor. And of all the vendors, there are really only 2 that have a viable working system in this space right now. There are others, but they've had challenges, but FAST is one of the ones that has had a viable system on the market for years now. I should also say that so our goal is to be under 30 days on the adjudication side, but there are also the ability to appeal determinations out of adjudication. So there is a low-level appeal process where they meet with an administrative law judge, and then there's also a higher level of an appeal and called the Employment Security Board, as well as the Supreme Court. So there are also 3 layers of appeals on top of adjudications. We're also trying to add another staff person or so to our call center to help with the long wait times in the call center as well. To your point about what changed, right? So part of it was the system, many processes in the system that were automated are now manual now. We've also had to add layer on technology that we didn't use prior. And so we've had to make our system more secure to keep out the fraudsters and to further protect the state system. And that just adds complexity to individuals who probably are not the most technologically savvy individuals. For instance, our new system, the current system and the upgrades since the pandemic require individuals to have an active email address. And you wouldn't think that's a lot to ask, but there are a lot of people who file for benefits who do not have active email addresses. And so that is a hurdle that we run into that requires a lot of troubleshooting and technical support for individuals to create an email address, actively use the email address, remember what the password is to the email address, because they need that email address to even file their weekly claims. That's the other key piece for those who aren't familiar. So unlike other benefit programs in the state, when someone opens a claim and they are deemed eligible for unemployment, they then have to file a claim each week for the weeks in which they're unemployed. And so it's not like you are determined, it's not one determination that's made per individual. It could be up to 26 weeks of determinations that are made for each individual. So it is a highly complex system.
I have a question from Rep. Stevens.
Off that a little bit, but still COVID related. I just read that Massachusetts is getting dinged to the amount of $2 billion of misused federal funding for unemployment. My memory of how we handled that here was that this is not an issue for Vermont. Is that?
So it depends on which programs and how it works. So most of the way unemployment insurance works, and their misuse was that they, if I remember correctly, and I think they were able to negotiate a settlement or something, if I read the most recent article, was that they spent money on using one program's funds on another program. And so they were either paying people out of the wrong program or they were using administrative dollars out of the wrong program. And so we did not run into that same situation. So again, if that's the one I'm remembering, that's how they ran it afoul of the system.
And because what we had to create, and I can't remember where the funding came from, but there was unemployment from actual employees that we had to take care of, or that we could take care of in a certain way. But then we created the program for unemployment for people who had never paid into the system, for independent contractors, et cetera. Self-employed, and I don't know that they did the same thing.
They did. It was called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, and it was a federal program. It was not a well-designed federal program, but what creates a lot of issues for states, and I'll give you an example. So if we deem somebody eligible in pandemic unemployment assistance, right? Like we tried to make people as eligible as quickly as possible to get money out the door. If we later determine that they really should have been paid out of unemployment insurance and not out of pandemic unemployment assistance, we then have to legally put that person in overpayment for all the benefits they received out of pandemic unemployment assistance. They have to pay that back to the department, and then we have to pay them out of regular unemployment assistance. So they may receive the same amount of money, but they were paid out of the wrong program. And it just creates a very challenging time and difficult situation for the claimant. We've been able to, in most cases, waive those overpayments or disregard those overpayments. And we've had those ongoing conversations with the federal government. We're also working with a vendor. We still haven't built the full PUA system as it was needed to be designed. And so we are still working with a contractor to meet the federal requirement to build a system that hasn't been active for the past 2 or 3 years. So that it's federal money, and we are doing it to meet the needs of the federal government, but that's how crazy it is with regards to that system. So I think their issue was they spent money that they shouldn't have spent out of programs that should have been spent elsewhere. And they either needed to reimburse the federal government, but I think they were also able to settle for an amount less than what was originally deemed an proper.
Thank you.
Rep. Iacoboni?
First, I want to thank you for all the assistance you've given me over the years with various claims that I've asked for help with. Can you tell me what your wait time is? Because the call center?
Sure. So this is another one of those situations that we talk about staffing. I would, on a Monday morning, I'd love to have 100 more people working in our call center because it still wouldn't be enough. But you call it a Friday afternoon and we're able to answer calls very quickly. So on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning, that maximum wait time could be upwards of 4 hours during our high season, which is but there is no, I should say, there's no requirement that somebody call on a Monday morning, right? So they have the entire week to file their benefits. And so it obviously, like many of us probably, we like to get things done right away. And so Monday mornings are our busiest time. But if you call on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday afternoon, you may only wait 10 to 15 minutes. And so we really try to inform the folks either through our different communication channels that there are better times to call. And if we can spread that call volume out over the week, it'd be a much better situation for most people. What does create an insurmountable task for us is when the system is down or there is an outage. And all that does is create a groundswell of people calling who can't get through to the system. So they call to find out what the issue is. And so we, on a monthly basis, we probably deal with at least, one disruption or outage a week of some kind. So again, there's never just a steady plateauing of the work at hand. We're often dealing with outages and other disruptions.
Commissioner, if I could just add for the record, thank you, Commissioner Smith. There is an option where you can request a call back. I know that's not always ideal depending on your circumstance and what you have going on. But if you hear the wait time is going to be upwards of 4 hours, there is an option to request a call back. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 99% of the time you get a call back that same day.
Yeah, so I also did some digging into this after our last conversation. So the challenge there is we can have a callback. We only allow so many people into that callback queue at any given time. So there may be times where it's not offered if the volume gets too high. And part of that is because our staff at the end of the day will then spend, once the call lines close, they will spend the next hour and a half calling people back out of the callback queue. And eventually we have to close the system down at the end of each day to run jobs through the system. So it's not a 24-hour system. We do have to log off by like 6 or 6:30 every night. But we are in a period where there's currently there's voluntary overtime for staff who want it, but we have at times, and we are considering mandatory overtime, which is not a great situation to be in. But there are still limitations that the system has.
Actually, Rep. Iacovoni was.
Just a quick.
One more. Okay, fine.
Does your system say the wait time is X amount of time, you may want to call back?
I'd have to check. I believe it does because we just this whole state upgraded its call system for all of the call centers. So I believe that's a feature on the new one. I just don't know.
Lily, Rep. LaRouche, and Rep. Smith.
I'm wondering, I'm really following up on Rep. Stevens' question about should there be, should the feds come back to us and declare that some of the claims that we filled were inappropriate to ARPA? Where does that funding come from then? And is there any reason to leave reserves? I mean, I know that we've put some kind of clawback insurance money in the agency administration. And I'm just wondering though, would this have to come out of your budget? And if so, how do we meet that need?
I appreciate the question and the concern. So for most programs, there's a two-parter to this. So for most programs, those programs have been closed out and been given the thumbs up by the federal government that we're good on those. And so there is little risk of that. We also have what's called the state finality law. And so under the federal government, they issued guidance this past year or two on that states could apply their own finality law. So I don't which means that like after 3 years following the end of a program, we can't then go after that money anymore unless it's tied to illegal activity. But we can't put people in overpayments, and we can't collect those overpayments back from people unless it was, part of identity theft or some other legal activity, like they are like intentionally lied on their application to defraud the system. The place I think where we are concerned and we are monitoring closely is that there was one federal program that was administered. You may remember it came out of the last Trump administration, called the Lost Wages Assistance Program. And so what that was is somebody receives their underlying benefit out of regular unemployment or pandemic unemployment assistance, depending on which program they fell into. And the Lost Wages Assistance Program added an additional $300 on each week. The reason we're watching that one, and there is some risk there, is because it came out of a different program not administered by the U.S. Department of Labor. And so there are different rules that govern that. It came out of the Federal Emergency Management Administration. And so you may remember, I think President Trump declared it an emergency and then used $80 billion or something like that to fund this program for states. And so the difference is that under unemployment, traditional unemployment assistance under the U.S. Department of Labor, we only are required to pay back the federal government if we collect the money from the claimant, right? So if there's an overpayment of benefits and we have to collect that money back, we're only required to repay the federal government when we collect that money back. Under this LWA program, it is simply treated as debt, and the state owes that debt. And so there is the possibility under that program when we close that out that, so there's always improper payments, and improper payments can be overpayments or underpayments. Our overpayment rate was incredibly low. We're below the national average. Non-pandemic wise and during the pandemic, and in the Lost Wages Assistance Program, we were extremely low compared to other states. But it was something like 5.6% were deemed improper payments. And so when we closed out that program, there is an amount of money that was identified as overpaid benefits. And it is likely it is for sure that the federal government will be seeking that money. It is possible that we will need to pay that money back. The reason I'm kind of hemming and hawing over this is because the administration change at the federal level may open a door for us. So a lot of states have held off on paying this until the administration change. And then there also may be other opportunities to either negotiate with FEMA and either reduce the amount required to pay back or not pay it back at all. And part of that is it's just not clear right now where that's going to go. And so we've held off on taking any action at this point.
Well, do you know how big that number is?
Yeah, it's about $3.3 million out of a $50-something million program.
Yeah. And then, sorry, my last question is, who's liable? I mean, would you then pursue the claimant and try to get payment back?
No.
This would be a state liability.
Yeah, so this would be a state liability if we are required to pay it back. And I think there are a lot of different mechanisms. So I think ideally, if we had to pay it back, we would look at a payback period as long as there was no penalty or interest. So we could pay it back over multiple years. That would reduce the burden, and it would be a state liability. So it wouldn't be something that we would then go after claimants for in this case, again, mainly because of the state's finality law. So we would still go after fraud in terms of ID theft and malicious fraud of the system, because we legally have to do that, but it wouldn't be something where we were going after Vermonters for that.
So the call center, these folks working in state office, or they working from home?
They work in a state office. They work at They work out of one of our offices. There's about, I would say, 10 to 12 call takers right now, and about 10 adjudicators right now.
You managed to continue that during COVID. You're still working on it then?
We were able to go remote for the first part of COVID where, the state sent everybody home. We had at one point, we had an additional 300 contractors through a vendor answering calls. But we were able to the biggest issue for us is that and what prevents us from doing a lot of remote work is that the age of our system, a lot of transactions are managed by paper, and so, we're not comfortable having, private, personal identifiable information sitting in people's homes. And because we also knew that they were home with their families. And then the other piece is it required us to literally have staff that were scanning documents all day long and sending them out to people who are working from home. So from a safety, security perspective, so a functional perspective, they came back to the
Yeah,
office.
and the reason why I asked is just whether or not, if they worked at home, from home, and they didn't have to, whether you're functionally, you could tell whether or not they were more effective.
Yeah.
Position or the other, you probably can't tell because you had all the contractors involved too.
Yeah, that was the hard part, was the contractors.
Just real quick, so with the modernization, it's 18 months to get this thing activated here, and I assume you're gonna have to run some things maybe together here for some stretch of time.
Mhm.
Is that within the 18-month?
Yeah, so
And with that,
we will go live with the entire system and we will do the cutover. It'll probably, again, somewhere between May and July of 26. We will go through a significant amount of data conversion and bringing all the data from the old system over prior to that. And we may, I'm assuming, just based on our redundancy, security measures, operate the mainframe before we shut it down to make sure everything has happened smoothly. But I'm confident with this vendor based on their success rate that, again, by the summer, my thing is I'm eager for us to go live with the new system, as everybody is. And there's nobody more eager than the claimants and my frontline staff. They would love to get rid of this mainframe probably just as much as some of the people who have to call in and deal with it every day. But I'm also, if adding a couple more weeks onto this project for training and to making sure it goes out without a hitch, I'm also supportive of that too, because when we do it, we need to make sure we do it right.
fully staffed up.
Yep.
To handle that.
Yeah. And again, we fully expect that the volume and we're currently working with ADS right now to develop a forward fate. We recognize that, we're still a year plus away. We will have to go through another busy season. And so we're working with ADS right now to develop a secure forward facing initial claim application so that, again, that's not the bulk of the calls we get, but it is the bulk of the time we spend with each person. And so if we can have people filling out that initial claim application on their own, and they simply call us, we activate the application so it's available for them in the system, and then they log in and complete the application. That's roughly the model we're looking at right now. That would turn a 25-minute call into a 5-minute call. And then we can answer more of those calls that are for other reasons. The other big reason we get calls is they struggle with technology, right? So we're constantly helping people navigate the system with the technology that we have. Things like multi-factor authentication really throw people for a loop. And the other reason is because someone is going through the adjudications process and our system right now doesn't give visibility into that adjudication process. So it just, it's kind of like a black hole, right? And it's not fair to the claimant. We just don't, again, the system, they can't log in and see the status of their claim and say, oh, I saw it move from here to here, or I know it's in adjudications and somebody's working on it. And it's not that adjudicating one claim takes a long time, but when you've got 900 claims that need to be adjudicated, they require, again, you have to talk with the employer, you have to talk with the claimant, you have to conduct fact finding on both sides, and then you have to issue a written determination that's in accordance with the law, and you're waiting for callbacks. You may have to also be getting wages from another state, or you may have to be dealing with multiple employers if they had multiple employing entities. So it is not a quick process, simply based on the volume and the complexity of what you're dealing with.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna change the subject to the wet fund.
Sure.
Because that's the other piece that, and by the way, I just want to mention, this is Mike Nigro's area, so if people have other questions, please do contact, both on the committee side and your side. But the wet fund, we're eliminating the special fund because it's gone away, but, so why was $2.5 million sitting there for many years? That's workforce money that's not being used.
So it's probably more of a finance and management question, but we will do our best to answer it with the information we have. So the wet fund was around for many years. It was part of the next generation appropriation, and multiple agencies or organizations used the wet fund. So the Department of Labor, Chad grabbed one of our wet fund memos from back in 2018, right? And there are 7 different entities that pulled money out of the wet fund for workforce programs. So the Department of Labor was just one of those 7. But most of the funds that came out of the wet fund were part of they were part of grant awards. And so in this year, the Department of Labor received $1.045 million. We then took that roughly $1 million, and we granted it out to training providers across the state. And so typically, if we didn't use that money, it was simply because a grant awardee didn't use all of the funds that they were awarded under that grant. What I've been told from finance and management is most of that $2.6 million in that fund dates back to before 2016. So some of it goes back quite a while. And again, I think it was a fund that rolled over each year. So from our standpoint, and I don't want to speak for Chad, but in our conversations, we don't really have visibility into the fund itself. We just know the amount that we were appropriated under the fund. And then for us, there were, a portion went to adult technical education, a portion went to UVM's tech transfer, Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies, a portion went to VSAC, another portion went to the National Guard. There was also a portion that went to dual enrollment and needs-based stipends under the Agency of Education. And then there was even one for large animal veterinary loan forgiveness that went to the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Market. So again, I can't answer that to the detail of what does that 2.6 represent, but I can tell you how.
So it's basically been sitting in this fund for years and nobody's paid any attention to it, and somebody noticed that it's been sitting around.
Well, I think what happened is there was the way it came to us from finance and management is we have a fund that's still active on the books. However, we are no longer, as a state, putting money into that fund. And so we want to close out the fund and get it off the books. And come to find out there's also, $2.6 million. Not that they didn't know that, but from my standpoint, we wouldn't know what the balance is. So their question to us originally was, do you have any issue with us sunsetting the wet fund? Because now that $1 million plus goes into your base budget. And we said, no, we don't have an issue with closing out the wet fund. We're not actively using it anymore. We have no more grants attached to the wet fund. But again, we didn't actually know about the remainder of the money in the fund till it came before this group and we were asked about it.
Great. Any other questions? I think not. Thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate your information. It's helpful for us to know, and we will see you again.
Yeah, and I will say, just know that the issue around the unemployment system and the struggle that our claimants go through is not lost on me. And it is something where we try to assist in whatever way we can, as Representative Iacoboni mentioned, so if you do have issues, there are times when a claim, gets stuck in the process. Right? Maybe maybe there's an issue with getting a hold of the individual, or for some reason it didn't get processed correctly, either from a systems perspective or a staff perspective. So if you do run into those situations, please, you're welcome to forward those to us. The answer for most people is you need to call the Claimant Assistance Center and talk with them first. But if there are times when we have individuals who come through all of you who have said, I've called and I'm not getting anywhere and I need assistance. And I would just say you're welcome to email us directly. You can go through Rowan in our office, and she will make sure they get someone to look at them. What we don't do is we don't move people up in line, right? So we can't be making those types of decisions based on someone's personal circumstances. But if it is a situation where the claim was either mishandled or is stuck somewhere, we are happy to make sure that claim is moving along.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you too, because you've helped greatly, you and a number of constituents who've been stuck, and it's appreciated.
Great. Yeah, happy to help wherever we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, we will go offline a minute and we'll be back promptly at 1 for Chair Wood from Human Services.